Hello, my name is Sandy Millen, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to present at an international conference. And we're going to look at some things that are connected to face-to-face presenting and some things that are connected to online presenting. But most of the advice is equally applicable to both of them. So if this was a live presentation, I would ask you at this point to say hello to other people, say where you're from, and to discuss what you want to learn today. So this is a nice idea face to face because it breaks the ice a little bit. It's people can get to know each other a bit. And if you're online, it gives you an idea of how engaged your audience are. And in both cases, you can hear the kind of things that people are expecting from your presentation. It's a nice little icebreaker. Okay, so a little bit about me then and why I'm doing this presentation. So this recording is for IATEFL Online 2021, and that's my 9th time presenting at IATEFL. It's my 2nd time doing the how-to talk. I did that a couple of years ago in Liverpool as well. And I've also done Pecha Kucha at IATEFL as well. I've done lots of other presentations at local and international conferences and online events as well. I really enjoy presenting. And it's something I think over the years I've learned to become better at. So hopefully the advice that I have for you today will help you with your own presentations. So the next question is, who are you? Again, if this was a live conference, I would, if we were all in the same room, I would ask everybody to shout out their country. Again, it's a nice little icebreaker, change of pace. Or if we were online, I would ask you to type it into the chat so we can just see just how international the conference is. Feel free to post it in the YouTube comments, for example. Your first question then to think about is, considering how international IATEFL is, how can you actually meet everybody's needs at an international conference? I think sometimes we might think that we need to, have a presentation that's suitable for anybody at the conference. But my first tip for you, or the first steps, is to say that obviously you can't meet everybody's needs, but what you can do is choose a topic which you care about. And if it's something that you care about, you will be an interesting speaker for people to listen to. If you don't care about it, people can tell, and it will be much less interesting for them. And also, you won't want to go through the process of putting the presentation together in the first place. So make sure that it's something you're invested in some way. You can ask for help with the presentation, with choosing the topic or narrowing it down. And if you're presenting for IATEFL, there's a mentorship scheme, so you can ask to have a mentor assigned to you who can help you prepare the talk. You may also be able to ask within your professional network for somebody to help you, somebody who's a more experienced presenter. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you're presenting at first, or even when you've been presenting for years. It's always good to ask for help. For IATEFL then, the next step is you've decided on your topic, you've asked for some help, then you need to send in your proposal. And there's actually a how-to talk on how to write a proposal for IATEFL. The deadline for IATEFL conferences for proposals is generally mid-September. My top tip is to save a copy of your proposal in a logical place on your computer. The first couple of times at IATEFL, when it came to actually preparing my presentation, I couldn't remember what I'd put into my proposal. So I've learned to always save that document in my dedicated IATEFL folder, so that when I come to prepare my presentation, I can open the proposal and check what it was I said I was going to talk about. And generally also look at it and go, that's not what I would talk about if I wrote that proposal again today. So there you go. The next thing as part of the first steps is don't be afraid. It can be a little bit frightening to do a presentation, but actually it's also a very exhilarating experience, and the people who are in the room want to hear what you're there, what you're there to say, and they are on your side. And at some point they have been or will be in your position as well. So don't be afraid, give it a go and see what happens. So you sent in your proposal, it's been accepted for the conference, and now you need to create your presentation. So how do you go about that? This is where the meat of your work will come in. As with lesson planning, a lot of the work comes in at the lesson planning stage. So start off with your ideas. This piece of paper that you can see here is actually my ideas from my talk that I'm doing right now. So it's just a brainstorm of all of the different ideas that I had to go into the talk. Then you need to calculate the timing. So I've just got all of the ideas I could possibly have, and I need to narrow these down. In order to do that, I need to think about how long will my presentation last. So I generally take 5 minutes away from my presentation time for questions. So if it's a 30-minute presentation, that leaves me with 25 minutes. If it's 45 minutes, that leaves me with 40, for example. And then I divide the rest of my time by 2, and that's how many slides I'm allowed. So for example, 30-minute presentation minus 5 is 25, divided by 2 is 12.5, rounded down is 12. That means I'm allowed 12 slides for my presentation. That generally works quite well, but if you're doing something more workshopy where you've got activities, so at IATEFL that would be a 45-minute presentation, you need to allocate 5 or 10 minutes per activity. So 5 minutes for questions, 5 or 10 minutes for each activity, and then divide the rest of your time to tell you how many slides you're allowed. If you're doing an online presentation using something like Zoom, then you may also need to allocate time for breakout rooms as well. Obviously, it takes a little bit of time to set them up and for the transfer of people actually getting into and out of the breakout rooms as well. Once you've got your timing, you can do something like this. So this is for this particular presentation that you're watching. I have got one piece of paper for each slide that I'm allowed, or for each activity that I'm doing. And on those, I take the ideas from my original brainstorm and I write just the idea that's going to be on that slide, or just the points that are going to be on that slide. Those pieces of paper are deliberately small because that means that I don't pack them with too much information. They're also all on separate pieces of paper because that means that I can move them around and change the order and throw something out and add another piece of paper if I want to. So I find this really helps with structuring my presentation and deciding actually exactly what I want to include. When you actually come to make your slides, you've decided what's going to be on each slide. You should aim for a simple, consistent layout. So rather than different colors or different backgrounds for each one. Aim for contrasting colors. Remember that some people in your audience may be colorblind, or they may have dyslexia or something else that makes it difficult for them to process the information. So a good tip for colors is to have a slightly off-white background, which actually I don't have here, but a slightly off-white background with a dark font on it, maybe a dark blue or a dark gray, and that makes it easier to see. Try not to have text on top of images unless it's in some kind of text box. That makes it harder to read again. If you are using slides, aim for minimal text. You don't need to write your entire presentation on the slides. Another thing to think about is whether you actually do need slides. So I'm using them now because there are some pictures of things that I want to show you, but actually for my main talk at the conference, I haven't got any slides because that helps to differentiate my talk from other people's talks. And it means that I haven't spent a long time creating slides that nobody's necessarily going to look at again in the future. And therefore I will have not a script, but kind of my main points laid out in front of me. So it is quite important to decide whether you actually need slides, whether you need to spend time creating slides, or whether a kind of script, not a script, sorry, whether a kind of list of notes will be more useful to you. Okay, so you've created your presentation. It's the big day, or it's coming close to the big day. Oh, sorry, one final thing, you need to acknowledge copyright as well. And you'll notice that every page that I've got images on, somewhere at the side it says what the source of those images is. So while you're doing all of your preparation then, things to consider. You need to decide what it is. What is the thing that you are talking about? You know, what's your main focus? So mine is very clear in this talk, how to present at an international conference. By the end of it, I'd like you to be able to, or feel like you're able to present at an international conference. You need to decide what your role or interest is in it. So that's why, for example, I told you who I am at the beginning, and why I might be well placed to help people out with presenting at an international conference. Okay, so you've decided what it is, you've decided your role or your interest in it. The next thing is why it is important. Why is it worth talking about? So in my case for this talk, lots of people don't feel confident about applying to IATEFL to do a conference talk, or perhaps even starting out a local conference or doing a workshop at their school. So it's important for IATEFL and for me to share ideas to help people feel more confident to do that. And then the biggest point is why the audience should care about all of this. Why should the audience care what it is, what your role is in it, and why it's important? So the same as with your lessons, you need to think about, if you're teaching English lessons, you need to think about why the students should care about the topic of today's lesson. You also need to do that for your presentation. If you don't know why they should care about it, then they probably won't care about it. So be really clear about that for yourself. The next question to consider is what the audience should do with or about it, about the topic of your talk. How much theory do they need connected to that? And what will they actually take away from the talk? What will they think about after the talk? Okay, so you've created your presentation. You'll notice that I made an error there with what happens next in my slides. That doesn't matter, nobody cares, just keep going. It's not the end of the world. We'll come back to problems and solutions later on. Okay, so it's the big day. You've prepared your presentation, you're all ready to go. What are you going to do? What else can you do before the presentation? You can rehearse your presentation. You might choose to rehearse it yourself. You might choose to record it. You might even choose to ask a friend to listen. If you are rehearsing for a face-to-face presentation and you're planning to stand up while doing the presentation, I would highly recommend you stand up while you're doing the rehearsal as well. Make the rehearsal as close as possible to what it is you're actually going to do on the day. And that will help you to feel more confident. If you're presenting face-to-face, try and visit your room before you present in there. And maybe if you have the opportunity, watch somebody else present in there so you can get a feel for what it's like as an audience member in there. How does the sound carry? Are there any, strange things going on with where the podium is, if there is one, or how the microphone works, anything like that? It's good to watch somebody else in there. If you're presenting online, try out the platform. Ask whoever's hosting the conference if you can, have a go at doing some or all of your presentation before you actually do the talk. Familiarize yourself with how the platform works. If you're presenting online as well, another thing to think about is your background and your lighting. Can people actually see your face? And how distracting is your background? I've chosen quite a neutral wall in my flat, and I'm deliberately wearing clothes that mean you can still see me against this background. So think about that. Otherwise, people will spend all their time reading your bookshelves behind you. It's very interesting, but maybe not what you want them to be doing during your presentation. Obviously, if you have no choice about where you're doing it, you could consider, for example, hanging a sheet behind you to make a neutral background. It's up to you, but something to think about. Regardless of whether it's face-to-face or online, check everything's working a long time before if possible, but always again within the 5 minutes or so before the presentation starts. Check your microphone, check your camera if you're online, check that the projector screen is aligned correctly if you're using slides, if you're face-to-face. Yeah, check everything basically. If you're face-to-face, the part immediately before your presentation is probably going to be when you feel the most nervous. So you might want to, for example, put handouts around the room already if you've got something that you need people to look at. That can reduce your nerves, but it also makes things smoother during the presentation itself. You may also want to find a few people in the audience to chat to, maybe a friend if you want to. Again, I think the biggest piece of advice is to distract yourself. If you spend 5 or 10 minutes immediately before your presentation going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm about to present, oh my God, all you'll do is like increase the stress spiral. So find something else to do, somebody else to speak to, something else to think about for the few minutes before the presentation. You can put an alarm on your phone if you're worried about forgetting when it's going to start, or you can ask somebody else to tell you when to start, but distract yourself. Okay, before the presentation. Now we are in the middle of the presentation. So if this wasn't a video, I would ask you to look at these icons and predict what I might say about these areas. And I would use this as an opportunity to have a little drink while you're having a chat. Changes the dynamic of the presentation, gives a little break, and it lets me have a drink. Good to plan a break in for both you and the audience. Okay, so the icon of the eye then. So if you're presenting face to face, ask if you know people in the audience, ask them to sit around the room in different places so that you have people that you know who you can make eye contact with around the room. If they're all in a line at the front, then you're unlikely to look at anybody else. You're unlikely to look at people at the back. Having said that, have at least one of them on the front row, because otherwise you will never look at the front row. If you're online, sometimes it can feel like you're presenting to yourself. So at the moment, for example, recording this video, I'm not actually speaking to anybody except myself. So maybe you can ask somebody to stay on video so that you can talk to them if possible. Maybe the moderator can stay on video, for example. That's not always possible. It depends on the platform. But if there's at least one person who you can see their reactions while you're talking, that can make it feel a little bit more natural. The other thing to think about if you're presenting online is at least you can't see all of the people in the room, and it's their choice what they're doing in the background. It's not your problem. So another tip is to switch off the self view if you can. I can't do that at the moment because I'm the only person in the Zoom room that I'm recording this on. And that's actually why I moved the video, because I noticed that I'm constantly making eye contact with myself because I don't have anybody else to make eye contact with. And my camera wasn't above where my video is. So it looked like I wasn't talking to you. It looked like I was talking to somebody else. So again, think about where your video and things are as well. If you're using a microphone in a face-to-face presentation, think about where to hold it, and ask somebody to help you, like how close to your mouth do you need to hold it for people to be able to hear you without getting popping sounds? What should you do? The same if you're using a headset when you're presenting online, where should the microphone actually be? You can also use headphones to stop the echo. So hopefully you haven't got any echo from my video and my microphone now, but headphones can stop that from happening. The little man with the watch, who's looking at his watch, this is thinking about the idea of pacing your presentation. So you'll notice, hopefully, that I'm aiming not to go too quickly, but I am aware that I've only got 10 minutes left. You want to ask somebody to indicate if you're rushing, but also ask somebody to indicate if you're going too slowly. Sometimes we go to the other extreme. Take the occasional deep breath. Okay, don't just talk in a stream. Pause. Let people think about what you're saying. It doesn't just have to be a word vomit, for example. Give people a chance to process what it is that you're presenting to them. The last thing to think about on here is thinking about exactly what you say. Don't have a script and don't read from the slides. That makes things very, very mechanical. Aim to speak as naturally as you can. So there are a few ways you can do it. You can have slides like I've got now. I know what my topic is. I know what I want to talk about, but I'm talking around it. I haven't planned every word that I'm going to say. Sometimes I use an index card for each point or for each area that I'm thinking about. I punch a hole in the corner and put a treasury tag in the middle so that I can flick through to the next one. And also, if I drop the whole pile, they're still in order. That works really nicely. Another idea is to have just a piece of paper that has your main points on it. Maybe you can fold over the top as you finish each slide, for example. Different ways of doing it, but ways to make sure that you're speaking as naturally as possible. Another thing to think about during your presentation, if you're looking at people's reactions, maybe you can see their videos online or in the face-to-face room, you can see their faces. Remember that people's reactions aren't just based on what you say. It's also based on the time of the day, what else is going on in their head. Is it 8:15 in the morning and they're not very awake yet? Is it after lunch? Is it the end of the day? Maybe nobody's writing in the chat online. Don't worry about those things. Just carry on with your presentation and don't panic too much about things. Engaging people during the presentation. Oh dear. So this is from IATEFL Harrogate, and at the beginning of my presentation, we had a little photo because there were lots of my friends in that audience. Introductions at the beginning, as I mentioned, they give time for latecomers to come in, they break the tension, and it also allows processing time if you have little discussions. So for example, questions like my predictions. It means that people can also talk about something else if they're not that interested in your presentation. Don't worry, those breaks are good for you as well. Plan to scale up or scale down your activities if not as many people arrive as you expected, or you've got way more people than you were thinking. And remember that their faces, if they're dull, doesn't mean that they're necessarily bored. They might have other things to think about. Remember that everybody will take something away from your presentation, regardless. How can you reduce your stress then? So if you're at the main IATEFL conference, you can go to the presenters room. If you're presenting online, move away from your computer. And as I mentioned before, distract yourself. Take deep breaths. Consider power poses. For example, looking at the TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. Think about how you're standing or what you're holding or how you're sitting. Know your topic. If you know it well, you'll feel confident talking about it. Remember that people chose you. They chose to come to your presentation and to watch your presentation. That means they're already interested. Nobody's forcing them to sit there. Accept that you're human and that you will be stressed. You will fluff things up occasionally. You'll make mistakes. You'll repeat yourself. You've seen me do it a few times. Accept you're human, move on. It's not the end of the world. And actually, most people probably won't remember later that you mixed something up. During the presentation then, what do you do if you have problems? So again, if we were in a face-to-face or live conference, I would ask you to predict problems and to think of some solutions. So these are some of the problems that I've come up with. So for example, my slides won't display. If your slides, if you're worried about slides, in a face-to-face conference, I would recommend having it on one or perhaps even two USB discs, USB sticks, put them onto Google Drive, have them in email, upload it to SlideShare, check compatibility, or even don't use slides, and then you don't need to worry about that. If you have an audio and it won't play, have a transcript or play it as a file outside the presentation. If the video keeps buffering, stop trying to play it, just summarize the content. If you can't get people's attention in a face-to-face conference, maybe ask everybody, put hands up and wait for people to stop speaking, maybe have a countdown, the same as you might in a class. If you're in a face-to-face conference and the room is half empty, encourage people to come closer. It's a lot easier to speak to a small group who are close to you than like 10 people scattered all around the room. They may not move, but you can encourage them. You could also potentially sit down if it's quite small. Maybe in an online conference, nobody's writing in the chat. So encourage them to do so, give them a specific question, or just don't worry about it. Maybe your presentation is too long or too short. I have 3.5 minutes left, so I'm running over now. Decide beforehand what you can cut, under plan. If it's too short, you can have more time for questions. You can ask people to say what they'll take away. Maybe you're panicking, so stay calm. I'm calm right now. Ask people a question. What have I told you so far? What do you still want to know? Let them discuss it with each other or write in the chat. And that gives you time to catch your breath and think about what's coming next. Okay, you've got to the end of your presentation. So you can make it clear, do you want questions from people only at the end of your talk or throughout? I generally recommend at the end because that's easier to manage the time. If you're in a room, repeat the question before answering it because not everybody will hear it, especially if it's somebody at the front of the audience. Predict possible questions beforehand and prepare some answers that can help you to deal with them. And maybe again, practice answering questions with a friend. Other things to think about are, what will the audience take away? Do you need a handout for them? Will you email them the presentation slides? Will you post it onto a blog? Consider that. You can give people your contact details if you want to. There's no obligation to do that though, but maybe people will want to ask you extra questions. Finish on time and leave promptly. That's very important at IATEFL, okay? People respect that as well. They want a break before they go to the next talk. After you've finished your presentation, reward yourself. Do something nice. Go and have a chocolate bar, have a chat to somebody. Tell your friend, I did it. I did my first presentation at IATEFL. Whatever you need to do, reward yourself. Relax. You've finished. You're done. Reflect on the experience. What did you learn from it? What would you do differently next time? And if you're presenting for IATEFL, you can write for the conference selections. And again, there's another how-to talk about that. I've got 1 minute left, so I just have enough time for a cheeky plug. If you like what you've seen here, if you like the way that I present things or we think about reflection, maybe you'd be interested in buying a couple of my books. They're very cheap, ELT playbooks. They are books of reflective tasks. And everything that you have seen today is available on my blog at howtopresent21 afterwards. And these are the questions for you to think about at the end of the presentation. So what have you learned from today's presentation? Have you got any questions? I mean, perhaps you could write them in the YouTube comments, for example. And 2 thoughts, give it a go. You never know, you may find that you really enjoy it. And good luck. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for watching.